Ever since the old days of 2nd edition, Thief has always been one of my favorite classes. Even though I got dumped on with the old, it doesn't matter what you roll, you can always play a Thief. The idea of a character who survives on skill and wit instead of power is compelling, and getting access to secrets inaccessible to others I find really enticing. Nowadays, every character that's proficient with Thieves tools can open locks or disable devices, and being able to use Thieves tools in 5th edition is still really useful. By opening locks, you're gaining access to something in the game that would otherwise be restricted, and disarming traps is a critical task that the party pays dearly for fouling up. More than that though, when the party encounters a lock or a trap, everybody at the table turns to look at the rogue. I love that! This is their moment to shine. Their special part in the team is coming into play. That player chose to be a rogue because they wanted to unlock things and get into secret areas, and bam, it's that opportunity for fantasy fulfillment right there. Because of you, the party either gets to avoid a penalty or gets easy access to rewards. You, as the rogue, are immediately showing your worth to the team. However, something to think about is that is all narrative. The main satisfaction is independent of the game mechanic used to execute it. And that gap right there gives us a little room to tinker with as designers. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a lot I do like about how Thieves tools are typically used in 5th edition, namely that it's fast and logical. But at the same time, I can't help but feel that there's a better way out there. Problem I'm having is I'm getting tired of opening lock and disarming traps just being roll the dice and succeed or fail. I like that it's quick, but I don't like that it's so repetitive, and I guess uninspired. For something that's supposed to be a key feature, one of the highlights of this fantasy archetype, actually using Thieves tools really just blends into the background of the rest of general gameplay. At the same time, I don't want to turn every lock or trap into a puzzle, something that can only be bypassed by a lot of clever thinking. Puzzles take a lot of time, both at the table to solve and for you as the DM to find or invent. Puzzles are cool, and maybe one day I'll do a whole video on them, but they are a major part of the session, whereas locks and traps are usually just a minor obstacle. Xanathar's already has a section on complex traps. They act in part like a monster, in part like a puzzle. But again, the way they are presented is as a major element that's going to take a hefty chunk out of your session. Another thing I want to tinker with locks and traps is I want to create more interesting ways of failing. The way I suspect most folks are running Thieves tools is a binary. One way we can add some variety and novelty to locks and traps is to find a logical way to have degrees of success and failure. So, with all of that in mind, here are our design objectives. 1, we're going to keep it fast. Locks are still just a speed bump, not a detour. 2, we're going to add some texture, some variety to how Thieves tools are used and locks and traps are opened and disarmed. And 3, we're going to expand from our binary by using degrees of success and failure. And to meet these objectives for sprucing up Thieves tools, there are 2 dials we can turn. We can adjust them mechanically, or we can adjust them narratively. The rest of this vid is going to be in 2 parts. First, I'm going to be talking about some ideas that you can put into your fiction, different ways of opening locks or disarming traps and some degrees of consequences for them. And I'm also going to share some new mechanics for locks and traps. These are essentially dice hacks that you can have your players do instead of having them just roll an ability check. I'm going to go ahead and put the mechanical crunchy bit first because it's not that long and it's really the coolest part of the video. And I'm going to spend a lot of time referencing success or failure, so it's probably best if you know what I'm talking about. To some degree, I do like the binary aspect of a single ability check to open locks or disarm traps. I like how all that drama can get compressed down into a single high stakes die roll. It all hinges on one character's skill. Because of course I don't let the other characters try. If the rogue, the specialist in the party, can't do it, why would anyone else even bother? With that one roll, either you make it or you don't. But novelty is sort of a requirement for drama, so you can't rely on having that one roll feel high stakes forever. We're also trying to give the rogue a quick something to feel like they are living out their fantasy of being clever and skilled, rather than just rolling a die and relying on luck. So instead of rolling a single die, the answer is of course to roll multiple dice. The obvious way to go about doing this would be to run locks and traps as a skills challenge. The rogue has to get X successes before Y failures. But with only one player involved and only one proficiency being tested, it really is just an expansion of that single die roll. All you're really doing is shifting the odds by adding more repetitions, which might be useful if you're trying to promote success or failure while keeping the DC constant, but other than that, it's pretty boring. Another idea is you can make multiple ability checks in succession, like a flowchart or an algorithm, with the results of one check affecting others down the line. For example, first the rogue needs to make an intelligence check to understand the mechanism, and then a dexterity check to actually unlock it. And if they fail the first roll, then they make the second roll with disadvantage, or the DC increases, or they need to make 2 in a row, something like that. That is a bit more interesting, but still feels very similar to nearly everything else in the game. It's not really special or distinct the way casting Stone Shape or using Lay on Hands is. So I think we need to make something new. And I came up with a little dice games, and I'm gonna go ahead and share it with you. When my players come across a lock or a simple trap, after the initial ability check, I've been tacking on a Price is Right or Yahtzee style mini dice game. And the results of the initial ability check affect the position they're in when they play that second game. Really quickly, I'm gonna give you 2 examples so you sort of know what I mean, and hopefully from there you'll be able to build your own. The first lockpicking game is you roll a bunch of d6s and then try to get 4 numbers in a row, like 2, 3, 4, 5. When the player goes to pick the lock, first they roll an intelligence check for the total number of d6s in the pool. A high intelligence roll means lots of dice and hence more chances. And then they make a dexterity check to see how many times they can re-roll a single die. And a high result means a high number of re-rolls. For example, scoring a 15 on the intelligence check means they get to roll 5 d6s, but scoring a 10 on the dexterity check means they only get 2 rerolls to make 4 out of those 5 dice be in order. It's really easy. It took less than a minute to explain and execute at the table. A second mini game would be to try to get the dice in ascending order by size. That is, you roll a bunch of dice and the d4 needs to have the lowest number showing, and the d12 needs to have the highest number showing. A high roll in the intelligence check might be doing this with only 3 dice sizes, a d4, d8, and a d12, and a low roll might mean having to do them with all the dice. A high dexterity check might mean you get additional rerolls, or you can throw additional d4s or d12s into the pool to sort of stack the odds in your favor. So those are my 2 examples. And I like that those are little mini games like Skyrim, and I really like that it has a tactile element. I really like the idea of using dice to represent manipulating something physically in the world. I don't know, I just really like it. I think it works really well, and I suggest you try it. Right now, the common way of running locks and minor traps is you just find a device, make a roll, and either you disable it or not. And there are some problems with that. If you don't pass your lockpicking roll, then the failure state is something the game remains restricted. It's cut off until the party finds a workaround. Or, unless it's a death trap, failing to disarm just means that the party pays an HP tax or they expend a use of lesser restoration. And all of that is just kind of boring. The consequences almost feel inconsequential. So to add some variety, we're going to go ahead and inject some degrees of success or failure into the rolls. And there are lots of ways to do that for strictly mundane mechanical devices. A bad failure, like failing by 5 or more, or by getting 0 right on the dice game, can be you set off the trap by accidentally snagging the tripwire, you break your lockpicks, or you slightly injure yourself, like you cut your hand or something and now you have disadvantage on dex checks until your next short rest. You can do some success at a cost, just barely passing the check. You can open the lock, but mar it so it no longer works. If you're doing a stealth job, you've blundered it because this is clear evidence of your passage. Maybe you jerry-rigged the solution, but you consumed half the materials in your thieves' tools, and next time you do it, you'll have to get another set. All those things are really a mechanical impact. You're messing with things on that player's character sheet. But you can also have a narrative impact. Hit a DC 10 and maybe you've gummed up the works, literally, to delay the trap, but only temporarily. But I think the real trick to having a meaningful narrative impact is to shift away from mundane devices and into the supernatural. After all, we are playing fantasy and folks are going to expect some magic after a while. And no, just saying it's a magic lock, it glows, doesn't cut it. I think the easiest way to get inspired to make something cool beyond just a mundane mechanism is to think about who made the device and why. These can inform the theme of exactly how the lock or trap works, and what the consequences of degrees of success look like. For example, let's say the dwarves made the lock to protect an ancestral tomb. Scoring a 15 on an intelligence check reveals that the crypt can only be opened by placing gemstones into a crusher as an offering to the forefathers. But a 20 would reveal that unless the characters offer finely cut rare jewels, the ghosts are offended and attack as soon as the door is opened. Or, a trap made by the gnome henchmen of a demonic cult might work like a projection of an illusion of a fiend. That saps a character's will, stacking lots of stat penalties or conditions until they can see through the illusion. And any failed attempt to jam up the lightbox projecting the image pings the mind of the gnome who created it. And now you have the enmity of the cult whose lair you were trying to infiltrate. Last example is going to be a circle of druids who protects the entrance to their sacred meadow by a thorny archway that can only be passed through during the full moon. A clever thief would know how to use a mirror and a lantern to hit the right spots with the right amount of light, and a dexterous thief would be able to prune those spots without getting pricked by the sleeping rose thorns. Scoring high on the first check would lower the DC of the second check by finding better rose buds to shine the light onto, and high on the second check lowers the DC for the save against the sleeping poison because you didn't get pricked nearly as often. And failing on either of those checks could have consequences that last beyond just the current session. Maybe the archway will seal itself up until the next full moon. And all those examples work because along with the picks and files, hacksaws and pliers, thieves' tools also come with the knowledge of security features and their counters. yeah, that's it. That's the video, folks. It's kind of a short one, but this is sort of a key topic that I don't think really gets covered all that often. If you like this video, please join my $1 Patreon, where you get access to a secret playlist that has all sorts of videos on game design, adventure writing, as well as some live plays of my home game. It's been a while since I put out a video, but that's because I've been hard at work. And I'm sad to say Galder's Gazetteer is not going to be ready by Christmas. It's a big project, and with a big project you expect some delays, but I don't think anyone really expected a global pandemic. But don't despair, I don't think it's going to be delayed by more than a few months, and progress is still being made every single day. And finally, we hit 10,000 subscribers. Wow, thank you. It really kind of blows my mind that so many people are interested in this sort of niche content, and especially interested in what I have to say on it. So thank you. And we only got to be this big because of the community that we built. That means people doing the thing, liking, subscribing, and letting me know your thoughts in the comments below.